And can you guys discuss our current state of democracy and what it means for our students and for our future? If you want to start us off, Dr. Jeffries.
Yeah, I think one, I think it's very important that and what has been made clear over the last 4 or 5 years or so, is that our democracy is not guaranteed, right? We have to, one of the great myths, I think, of America is this idea of perpetual progress, right? In many ways and in many areas, perpetual racial progress, but also perpetual democratic progress, right? And this is where the historian in me comes into play. When we think about the beginning of this nation, the founding of this nation, and who democracy was for, it was very limited. And certainly it has expanded over the centuries, but it's only expanded because people have been willing to fight and sacrifice and die to expand it, right? And so if we do not have people who are willing to fight and die and sacrifice to maintain and to expand first and then maintain democracy, then in my humble opinion, then we default back to what we started with, right? Like what we're seeing now, I don't necessarily frame as a backlash or a white lash. I see it as an attempted course correction, because American history says that it is limited. What we see is a limited democracy, and it's only been expanded because people have been willing to fight for it. And so if students can recognize, I think what we need to teach to students and the general public is there's no guarantee that this expansion will be held and maintained, or that we will continue to expand, because there are people who don't want it to occur. And we've always had that, and those folk have been at the centers of power. And so if we don't understand the way our democracy works, we don't understand the fight that has been necessary to build it and expand it. And if we don't do those things now, then the democracy will crumble. You have people, and this last thing, and I'll be quiet at least for 2 minutes. Right now, we have people who are fighting to protect democracy. And we have people who believe, and because they believe in democracy, you may not disagree with all their policies, but it's clear that they believe in democracy. But you also have a large segment of the population, including that 4.5%, right? But many others as well who were behind them, who believe that democracy is the problem. They believe that democracy is the problem. It's not worth protecting, that it's the problem. Free speech is the problem. Inclusion is the problem. Expanding the vote is the problem. That means you see democracy as the problem. So, we're not engaged in a policy debate with many people. And we have to, if it's ain't about taxes, right? This is about whether or not what is core to making this republic is actually worth preserving and protecting.
Thank you. Dr. Nucci, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that everything that he said is absolutely correct, but we also are in a period of intentional misinformation. We are using the technique of the big lie that was perfected by Adolf Hitler and being used extremely well. We are engaging in one-sided persuasive argumentation rather than discussion. All our arguments are food fights rather than just an attempt at actual conversation or debate. And we have a siloing of information through the social media feed. Any of us who are on Facebook or Twitter, we're not seeing everything that's out there. We're seeing the things that algorithms are presenting to us. And all of this is extremely dangerous for an actual democracy, because it means we're not listening to each other. We engage in games where we provoke and tease the other side. We don't really listen to them. And I think that a lot of what was said throughout this webinar today has to do with how we can, as educators, engage students in seriously getting basic information, but also learning how to engage in responsive engagement in our conversations with each other. Democracy depends on conversation, and it depends on access to the truth. And if what we're doing is only listening to the people who we agree with, if we are seeing the people on the other side in these sort of cartoonish ways as people who don't have value, then democracy can't work. And I agree with Professor Jeffries that we are really in danger. And I'm old enough to have lived as a kid when we had the Red Scare and when we had the House on Un-American Activities Committee. I've worked with colleagues whose careers were threatened by loyalty oaths. When I was a doctoral student at UC Berkeley, I had to sign a loyalty oath. I had to indicate whether I had ever been at any time in my life a member of the Communist Party in order to get my research assistantship. So democracy is fragile. It requires a lot of nurturing, a lot of courage, and it requires an educated population. And the things that I'm seeing going on with these laws that are being proposed are really to undercut democratic discourse and to try to put us into camps at each other, not to listen to each other, and then to go with an authoritarian who will tell us what to do. I think we are in a real critical moment right now, to be honest with you.
And if I could jump in, Jar, just to
Oh,
ask,
definitely.
just to ask a question, Dr. Nuji. So one of the things, I like to debate and have discussions with people, but one of the subjects that I just do not debate with people at all. Even my brother, who we love to argue with stuff, we both agree, we don't debate this issue, is we don't debate religion. Now we'll listen and we'll talk and we'll ask questions, but we don't debate religion, because I see religion as by definition sort of faith, and faith is belief in the absence of fact, right? And so there's not that much I can tell you or say to you to sort of move you off a position. And we can debate Quranic verses, we can debate or discuss interpretation of biblical verses, but in the end, it's just what you choose to believe. So there's no fact necessarily that I can present to you that can move you off a position. And I think that's kind of where we are now with our political discourse, right? I mean, you have some folk who are willing to talk about facts and this is what happened, but then we see, like with critical race theory, like the hysteria around that, for example, or the hysteria around the big lie and voting fraud and all this other stuff, that it's like debating people who have taken that, the sort of religious position. Like there is no fact that I can show you, right, despite all the evidence, that is going to move you off of this commitment to these lies. And so what do you do? Like, how do you approach that if you can't actually have discourse because they're so entrenched in something that can't be, and they refuse to be moved with what is an objective fact?
I actually think that part of what we need to do as educators is to give people the skills and the I don't know if you would call it a habit or the attitude that fact finding is something that we do. That you don't just accept that if Tucker Carlson says something that is true, or if Rachel Maddow had convicted Trump of all kinds of things, that you need to have an orientation toward life that facts matter, that it is important to get facts, and that it's important to listen to other people respectfully and to engage with them. My son's father-in-law lives in Orange County, and he and his son are both really committed to baiting me, trying to own the lib. So they'll say absolutely ridiculous things just to get me to react. And it's hard for me actually to have conversations sometimes about just what is the information. And I actually think that this is where science education comes in, to even appreciate what science is. That science is not about things that are just given and settled. That we constantly have to go interrogate what's out there. And I think that's a critical part of a democratic education, is this commitment to information and a commitment to facts. And we now are living with political figures who will say that they have alternative sets of facts, for crying out loud. We can't even say, as was said this morning, it is what it is. Well, they'll just say, no, it isn't. And they'll come up with their own facts. And we need to get away away from that. And I do think that that's the role of education. What we need to do as educators is to have that as a core value, truth, that truth matters. And that we can't have conversations if we aren't willing to actually engage in trying to find out what the truth is, rather than just simply accept what people who have authority and who agree with our point of view say what we should believe.
I actually, to go back to the last seminar, just ever so briefly, one of the suggestions in that scenario that was proposed was asking, the child, well, have your mother send in the book. And I got a chuckle out of that, but that is actually a wonderful suggestion in a sense. You're saying to the student, well, just bring in your facts, right? And we're in all of these cases, the one thing that we know, if we're teaching this history honestly, we're teaching it accurately and effectively, like we're not making anything up, right, about these historical figures. We're not making anything up about the role of racism and race in American society. So we can bring facts. But asking young people, students, hey, I'm not gonna dismiss you. We'll bring your information, and then we can look at it together. So to begin that process of training and saying, no, this is about being able to interpret, digest, and which is all the more important, having critical media, a critical analysis skills for media and that consumption and social media consumption, I think fits in right along the lines of what you were saying.
Yeah, I think the whole goal of critical pedagogy is, in fact, to integrate your own personal experience, which is one set of facts, with information gathering, not in the sense of a banking model where you just hand over things, here's the truth, but that there is a commitment to truth, that it has a value. And I think we're in some serious trouble in this country right now about this issue and the importance of truth in our conversations.
Yeah, thank you. Those great points. I can't believe they made you sign a loyalty I mean, that's crazy.
I inherited the office of Diana Baumann. She was next door to me. And Diana, if those of you who know about the three types of parenting, authoritarian, authoritative, and democratic parenting, that's her work. But she was a communist in the 1930s. And she was a communist, and it was an idealistic thing for her. And then as she became more familiar with what was actually going on in communist societies, she remained a serious scholar of Marxism, but she no longer, was a member of the Communist Party, but she had been. And she and another famous psychologist, David Krzyzewski, became David Kretsch. They were both communists in the 1930s. And when the state of California had the loyalty oaths, both of them were going to be fired, summarily fired. And the head of the Department of Psychology at UC Berkeley said, I will not ask my colleagues to have to sign these oaths. And they went, and the Supreme Court supported them, and they ended up not having to sign the oath. But this is 1968. We're not talking like, 1468. 1968 was when I was a doctoral student at UC Berkeley. We had were you ever a member of the Communist Party?
Wow.
And if you had been and you checked no, then you had perjured yourself.
Wow.
And so this is how this was done. So, and they got rid of that. We no longer have that, but it took a lot of resistance on the part of administrators within the University of California to have that changed.